Hey gang, I want you guys to do me a favor. Run in your kitchen and go and grab the sponge that's sitting on the sink. Okay, have you got it? Okay. Now, I want you to smell your sponge. Does it smell nice and fresh, or does it smell weird and funky? Because if it smells weird and funky, that means your sponge is full of bacteria. And speaking of bacteria, that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about bacteria, parasites, and food-borne illnesses that can come from your handling and preparing of your fresh catch. My name is Yanni, this is Fisherman's Belly, and we're going to be talking about how to keep everyone safe in your family. And by the way, if you want to know how to disinfect your sponge, just wait to the end of the video and I'll tell you 3 different ways of keeping your sponges nice and clean. Here we go. Alright gang, so a couple of weeks back, a gentleman named Hal Reeser from the Oceanside Senior Angling Club invited me to do a presentation for their club. And I did a presentation on this very topic, bacteria, parasites, and safe food handling so that all your friends and family and yourself can be safe. I got a great response, a lot of engagement from the crowd. Everyone had lots of questions. So that's what inspired me to do this video. Let's start off with bacteria. So bacteria love fish, and they love fish blood and fish fluids. When you catch a fish on a sports boat, long range or half-day boat, the first thing the deckhand's going to do is cut the gills and start to bleed the fish. And why is that important? The reason that that is important is because bacteria use blood as a starting platform to grow and multiply. As soon as that fish is dead, that bacteria is going to start coming to life and overtaking the fish. So the first thing the deckhand will do is cut the gills, and then if you're on a long-range boat, they'll put the fish into an RSW, a refrigerated saltwater system, or they'll put the fish in a kill bag. And the reason that they do that is they want to keep that fish cold. So the fish's fluids, its bloods and its general fluids, will help the bacteria grow, but the cold temperatures will slow the growth down. Bacteria love to grow at above 40 degrees F. That's why our refrigerators are at 40 degrees and colder. So as soon as they put that fish in the kill bag or in the RSW, the temperature of the fish drops and that bacteria growth is slowed down to a bare minimum. And that's great news for us. Now it's up to us as fishermen to keep that fish cold until we get home, and then to either deal with it and put it in a freezer or in the refrigerator, still keeping it cold until the point that we need it. Let's just back up for a minute in terms of the blood. Remember I said that the blood is a starting point for the bacteria. The absolute best way to make sure that you try and evacuate as much blood as you can out of that fish is not only cut the gills, but if you as an angler have got a knife and you're on a sports boat and the deckhand has got your fish, reach down there and take your knife and cut a slit at the base of the tail. Take that knife and go all the way to the base of the tail, and what you're doing is you're actually cutting all those major arteries and veins that are way back of the tail and that loop back towards the fish. And by cutting those veins, you're going to be ventilating the blood system, and the blood will come out a lot quicker. And while that fish is still alive, in other words, while its heart is still beating, it'll pump out all that blood. And by pumping out as much blood as you can, you're robbing the bacteria of its starting platform. You're robbing the bacteria of having a place to really start to grow and flourish. And in the long run, even if you freeze that fish or you put it in the refrigerator, it's going to stay a lot fresher longer without that blood. If you've ever put a fish fillet in the refrigerator and forgot about it and go there 4 or 5 days later, you're going to smell a bad smell. that's actually bacteria that's been feeding on the blood. And then once it feeds on the blood, then it attacks the flesh. So that's why it's important to bleed your fish properly. And like I said, the deckhands aren't going to cut the tail for you. But, you know, even if you're in the middle of a hot bite and your deckhand's got your fish, just take a pocket knife and cut that tail. That way you're going to ensure getting rid of as much blood as you can, and your fish will last a lot longer. Of course, getting rid of the blood from the fish is going to improve the taste because blood has got that minerally taste. But that's not the primary reason. Again, the primary reason is to rob that bacteria of all of that blood and a starting point to grow. So, there you have it. Now, let's talk about fish that is frozen, okay? Now, this came from a fish processor. It's just a piece of yellowfin tuna belly here. And how do you handle this? How do you thaw this properly to prevent bacteria, right, from growing? The best way to handle this fillet is to actually, when you take it out of the freezer, you want to put this in your refrigerator overnight and it'll thaw out properly. And whatever you do, do not take this frozen piece of fish and put it out on the countertop all night. Although the inside of the meat of this fish will still be cold in the morning, the outside flesh will have reached room temperature and the bacteria are already growing. So never ever take frozen fish or any frozen meat and put it out on your countertop to thaw. Always put it in your refrigerator overnight, and that way it'll thaw out properly. Or if you've been following me and you watch some of my videos, there are some quick and safe ways to thaw out fish. If you're in a pinch and you don't have any thawed fish, you can take this and put it in a bucket of water and turn the spout on and let the water trickle through the bucket. That way it'll circulate the water around this frozen fish, and you can thaw out fish within an hour. Typically, 1 or 2 pounds of fish will definitely thaw within an hour. So that's a safe way of doing that. But let's get back to thawing out your frozen fish. The best way to thaw out your frozen fish is to take a pair of scissors to cut the bag. This is straight out of the freezer, right? Cut the bag, take the fillet out, and to wrap this frozen chunk of fish in your paper towels. So why am I doing this? For a couple of reasons. There's some excess fluid in this fillet right here, and the paper towels will absorb the excess fluid. And why do we do this? While it's thawing. And why do we do this? Again, we're robbing the bacteria of fluids. Not only do the bacteria grow in blood, but they grow on the excess fish fluid that surrounds the fillet. So by wrapping your frozen fish in a paper towel, putting it in a dish, and then putting it in your refrigerator the night before, now not only are you going to safely thaw the fish and prevent bacteria from growing temperature-wise, but you're also taking away the extra fluids because the paper towel will wick the fluids away from the fillet, and you're robbing the bacteria of those fluids, another starting point. Whatever you do, don't take a vacuum-bagged piece of fish like this and thaw it out overnight and leave it in its original bag, because as you know, whenever you thaw out fish in a wrapped vacuum bag like this, you're going to have fluid in here. I can see the blood in here already, all right? So I'm not going to put this in the refrigerator overnight and allow this blood to be here and allow that bacteria to start feasting on that blood. The whole point of what we're trying to do is to minimize the food that we give the bacteria. The more food that the bacteria have, the more they grow in numbers. And the larger the numbers are of the bacteria, that's when things get really sticky in terms of risking our own health and our friends and our family's health with a huge colony of bacteria sitting on this fillet and possibly poisoning us or making us very, very sick. All right, gang, so we've talked about a couple of important subjects: temperature and the fish fluids / blood, and thawing and freezing. But let's talk about something else. Cutting boards. Oh boy. Okay, so there are basically two kinds of cutting boards on the market. There's wood, this is bamboo, and then there's plastic, all right? The reason I like bamboo is because the wood grain is very, very tight and dense. But inevitably, as you can see here, you end up with cut marks on your wood. Bacteria live and hide and breed and multiply in these cuts in the wood. And the same goes with plastic. You know, you can end up with cuts in plastic, and bacteria actually will hide and live in the cuts in the plastic. So, you know, there's been a long-term debate on, you know, which is actually a safer material to cut your protein, your meats, your fish on. I say they're both not safe, or they both can be safe if you regularly wash and clean these. Now, when you're washing and cleaning these, you can certainly wash with soap and water and a sponge. Remember the sponge? I wash and clean with a sponge, soap, and water after every time I use my cutting boards. But once a week, or at least once every other week, once every 2 weeks, I will wash my cutting boards with either bleach or white vinegar. And this is pretty cheap. I buy this at Smart and Final or any big grocery store for $2 or $3. I love white vinegar. I use it for cooking and I use it for cleaning. And the reason I prefer white vinegar over bleach is because bleach is very cancer-causing. This is very carcinogenic. You know, long-term exposure to bleach is not good news. So although I still will use bleach every once in a while, I prefer vinegar. And like I said, you've got to get on a regular schedule of washing all of your cutting boards with either bleach or vinegar, because food particles will hide in those cuts and bacteria will grow and multiply, and no matter how well your fish is taken care of, no matter how much blood you've taken out of it and you've kept the temperatures down, if you throw it on a cutting board that's full of bacteria, guess what? You stand a chance of getting sick and making everyone else sick. So get in the regular habit of washing your cutting boards. And I'm also talking about that big plywood sheet that's in your backyard. Whenever you bring home a big white sea bass or a big halibut and your wife won't let you fillet it in the kitchen, you've got a big plywood sheet out in the back and you use that to fillet. If you're doing that, get in the habit of washing it with either vinegar or Clorox, you know, every week, every other week, especially during the fishing season when you're using that board a lot. That way you'll keep your cutting boards nice and safe. And the sponge. We're going to talk about this at the end of the video. Hold on. All right, let's start talking about another subject, and that is parasites. Parasites can make you and your family very sick. Nausea, diarrhea, vomiting, stomach, abdominal distension. It's just a nightmare. So the question is, which fish have parasites? Can you hear Jeopardy music going on in the background? Dun, 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 dun. Okay, do I see any hands? Okay. All fish have parasites. Fish have... It's just part of the food chain in the ocean or in fresh water, especially fresh water. Salmon, parasite city. Anyway, here's the deal. So the question is there an exception to the rule? And there is. There is one exception to the rule, and that is tuna. Tuna are very safe to eat raw, and there are no parasites to be passed along from tuna to human beings, statistically speaking. But all the other fish, there is a good chance that they have parasites. So what do we do about that as fishermen? Well, parasites can be killed by either freezing the fish, freezing your fillets for 3 or 4 days, that way you make sure that they're dead, or by cooking the fish, 130 degrees and above. That way you'll make sure that all those parasites are dead. And so there you have it. It's just as simple as can be. So one of the questions I got asked at the Oceanside Senior Angling Club is, what about sushi and sushi bars? Well, believe it or not, all sushi bars get their fish frozen. And that's why when you go to a grocery store and you buy fresh fish, it's actually been frozen beforehand. They're not going to allow you to have raw fish because of the parasite danger. So just remember that. I've been guilty of it for years. I used to catch yellowtail and I would bring soy sauce and wasabi with me and enjoy freshly caught yellowtail that I would cut up and say, hey, look at me, I'm eating some yellowtail sushi here, you know. But I was putting myself at risk and I was putting everyone else at risk. So the smart thing to do if you want to enjoy a raw fish dish, all right, where you're not cooking it, you need to freeze it. You need to freeze that fish, and if you do a good job freezing it and vacuum bagging that fish, freeze it for a week, let it thaw out. You can still enjoy it as sushi or raw fish, which brings me to a question. What about salt-cured fish, and what about ceviche? Will that kill parasites? No, it won't. Salt-cured fish, you still have a danger of parasites, and ceviche, where you immerse your fish in citrus juice, won't kill the parasites. So if you want ceviche, or if you want salt-cured fish like gravlax, you've got to freeze the fish first. And just do a good job vacuum bagging it, and you'll maintain the integrity of the fish. So that's it about parasites in a nutshell. All fish have potential of having parasites except tuna. So there you have it. All right, gang, so now it's time to get back to the sponge. Remember the sponge? Remember I said if it smells nice and clean and fresh, you're good to go. But if it smells a little bit on the funky side, it's full of bacteria. And why is it full of bacteria? Because we use this sponge every day to wipe things up, to wipe up our cutting boards, to wipe up our countertops, to wipe up around the sink. And the sponge stays wet. And remember, bacteria love moisture. And especially when you are loading this sponge up with food particles, bacteria are going to town. When you're busy sleeping in your bed, bacteria are having the time of their lives in your sponge. You need to get into the habit of grabbing your sponge and smelling it. And if it smells bad, it's time to clean the sponge, all right? Or throw it out and get a new sponge. But you can get more life out of a sponge if you just clean it. And I've got 3 different ways to clean it. Number 1, take some soap, take a small Tupperware container, put your sponge in there, put a couple drops of soap on it, put some water in it, and put it in the microwave. I found that in my microwave, 1 minute will do the job. So when I walk by the sink, I get into the habit of grabbing that sponge and smelling it, and if it smells funky, the first thing I do is put a little soap and water, put it in the microwave, and zap it. Let's say at night, if you get into the habit of smelling your sponge before you go to bed, an easy way to do it is to take your sponge again, put it in a Tupperware container, put a teaspoon or 2 of some Clorox with some water, and just leave it on the counter and leave it overnight. That'll take care of the problem. Or, if you really want to be safe, you can use white vinegar and do the same thing. A little bit of water, a couple teaspoons of white vinegar, and leave it on your countertop overnight, and that way your sponge will stay clean. Believe it or not, in your kitchen, this is one of the biggest sources of bacteria and spreading bacteria all around. Can you imagine if you've got a bacteria-filled sponge and you've got a cutting board that you've just washed and then you're wiping it with your sponge or cleaning it up and you've just spread more bacteria all over the place. So, if you want to keep a nice healthy kitchen and keep food-borne illness to a minimum, especially if you're a fisherman, make sure your sponges are clean. So if you want to keep your kitchen safe, clean your sponges on a regular basis. All right, gang, so that wraps it up. I hope you guys have learned a few things. And if you have any questions about our topics today on this video, ask them down below. I'll be sure and get back with you. If I can't answer your questions, I'll find someone who can. And I hope you take all this to heart and incorporate some of these little practices that I've mentioned into your daily routine as a fisherman. That way you can keep safe, keep your family safe. And the bottom line is, if you start getting people sick from your fishing, from your fresh catch, they're not going to encourage you to go fishing anymore. So keep everyone safe, keep everyone healthy and happy with your safe practices. That way you can keep fishing. My name is Yanni. This is Fisherman's Belly. And I'm glad you guys hung out with me today and learned a few things about bacteria, parasites, and food-borne illnesses. We'll see you guys in the next one.